Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. President Zenger, students, faculty, and guests. We are delighted to have you here. Welcome to a special edition of In Conversation. I have the pleasure to spend the next hour with Andy Billman. Andy is an adjunct faculty here at the University of New Haven in the Department of Communication, Film, and Media Studies. Andy is a graduate of the University of Toledo, where he earned a BA degree in communications. Andy is an award-winning producer, director with a passion for sports and storytelling. His career started at ESPN in July 2002. His experience includes SportsCenter, the ESPYs, Playmakers, Tilt. Andy has worked as a producer and director of documentaries, including The Two Escobars, Winning Time, Youngstown Boys, Playing for the Mob, Bad Boys. Additionally, he produced other ESPN film projects, The Announcements, The Unguarded, The Book of Manning, and Believeland.
I'm worn out.
Professor Billman's work has earned him a Peabody Award, 2 Emmy Awards, and recognition by the NAACP. Our focus today is Andy's latest documentary, War on the Diamond. Winner of Houston, Boston, and Cleveland International Film Festival Awards, Andy tells the story of the only baseball player to die from an injury suffered in a major league game, and of the rivalry that it's launched for over 100 years. War on the Diamond focuses on 4 points. First, tragedy, the rivalry, a love story, and a change by Major League Baseball of a rule in 1971.
If you're a real Clevelander, you hate the Yankees. You don't really need explanation.
There's something there in that rivalry. It's so historical and deep-seated.
When the Yankees came into Cleveland, the intensity meter was on another level.
They were the haves, and we were always the have-nots. We embraced that underdog thing to the max.
And it all started with one pitch.
I heard from so many fans, where's the Ray Chapman plaque?
The Indians and the Yankees were locked in a tight pennant race when Ray Chapman was tragically struck down.
And by 1916, he was regarded as one of the best shortstops in the game.
He's the only player to die from an on-field injury.
You had 2 franchises been around for a long, long time. Both of them ready to rip each other apart.
Cleveland just wants success at any level.
A Clevelander bought a team in New York.
All of a sudden, Cleveland was our biggest competition.
I think it was a rivalry that never stopped.
I didn't have any feeling of guilt whatsoever. I didn't hit Chapman. Chapman hit himself.
Problem is, the Yankees don't see us as much of a rivalry as the Indians see the Yankees, and that makes me hate the Yankees even more.
Ladies and gentlemen, documentary director and producer, Andy Billman.
Well, thank you. Honored to be here, and go Guardians. I know Joe's a Yankee fan. I have a lovely wife, so Yankees fan, but go Guardians.
Andy, a fascinating story, and how did the documentary come to be?
So during the pandemic, I was pitched by some LA producers, Art Horan, Danielle Albrico, and they said, do you know the story of Ray Chapman? I go, I'm very familiar with the story. For those of you who don't know, I directed a film called Believeland. And Believeland was a history of Cleveland sports ending up in the most wonderful moment you could have, the Cavs beat the Warriors. So when I did that film, I learned about Ray Chapman through a few of my interviews. And ironically, I never heard about the Chapman moment growing up. So I kind of knew about it, and the book that we based it on is called The Pitch That Killed, written by Mike Sohl, who's in the trailer we just watched. And so when I read through it and I talked to him, I go, I would like to do this film a lot. And I do know the history. I go, but I'd like to put my own twist to it. Joe, when I grew up in the 80s, there was a film called Major League. They say it's fiction. It was a real documentary about how bad the Indians were. And so when the Indians were getting blown out, probably by the Yankees or other teams, My dad and I and my brother just started talking, like, what do all these things mean around Cleveland Municipal Stadium? Like, what's 54? What's 48? What's 1920? And what I started to learn is a lot of these things intertwined with Yankee moments. And so what I said is, I go, I would like to do this film, but I'd like to do a deeper dive into why in the late 70s we did I Hate Yankee Hanky Night. Why the Steinbrenner owning the Yankees was a big deal to us Clevelanders. Why 48, 54, why Bob Feller wrote an autobiography, and one of the chapters is why I hate the Yankees and hate New York even more. And so I said, I think it's time to start asking and getting into this. Now, you're always going to have debate, and we're not debating Red Sox, Yankees, or anything like that, because that's a wonderful rivalry, and it's very strong and very different. This is obviously, as Senator Brown jokingly said, it's more from the Clevelanders' perspective, but for Clevelanders, it's very real. And so that's how I got pitched. I said I'd love to tell the story, but more importantly, I'd like to tell the story of why there's still some deep-rootedness even in 2022 today.
So what were some of the roadblocks that you ran
Oh
into
gosh,
trying to
Joe's,
do this story?
there's always roadblocks. A few of them that we dealt with that were very unique was a pandemic. We basically as we started this project, late November of 2020. And so because of that, all we did were Zoom calls, conference calls, and so we really started road mapping things out that actually ended up helping us a lot. Because once we got into the production schedule, we had been so well rehearsed that we were just ready to go zip, because all we did is talk about it in all these conference calls, which people don't know in production, that usually is not the case. Usually it's like, oh, hey, you just got the money, you should go make the film tomorrow. You got to run as fast as possible, and if you fell down, it's okay. In this case, it's the opposite. But the challenges were real. I mean, COVID and pandemic, people were not ready to do interviews in person. We had a lot of challenges of how we were going to get said people to feel comfortable to talk about it. So we faced those challenges, and then on top of it, we had the challenges of people were still not really comfortable with going out and doing anything. So when we go shoot a game, you want the stadium filled. These stadiums were empty in 2021 because they had these rules about where you're supposed to sit in the stadium. So a lot of challenges that way. The other challenge is it's a 1920 story. There's no video. There's not a lot of things. There's no CNN headline news articles or anything like that came out. There's no magazine shows. So the challenges that we faced early on that we talked about, and I'll credit Paul Carruthers for this, he was a wonderful editor in this film, we decided to do reenactments. I'm not a big believer in reenactments.
Good.
Thank you. They took a lot of practice, and we did them. For people who don't know, reenactments and stuff like that, we usually do it in a 5-7 day period. Because we did this on a limited budget, we did it in 36 hours. We did, we did it like shotgun wedding. We basically did 18 in Cleveland, where we did all the housing, we did all the stuff with Chapman and Daly walking down the road. We did all that in Cleveland. And then we did the baseball stuff in Muzzy Field, which is actually just down the road here in Bristol, Connecticut. And for people who don't know, Muzzy Field was actually built in the early 1900s. Babe Ruth actually played there. And so that gave us the real authentic look of a 1900s stadium. And so that's where we did it. But so the reenactments were key. The challenges of this is how do you make a story come alive that's 100 years old? So reenactments, hopefully some storytelling through interviews. And then I think the real key to this whole thing, we got Ray Chapman's sister in an interview before she passed away. I think that really brought her to life. Very, very brought her to life. We were lucky. There was a documentarian trying to do a documentary on Chapman. It ended up not working out. So we did pay for that, but we got that interview. And then the Carl Mays audio, I mean, for people who didn't hear that, Carl Mays is not very forgiving of that moment. I think he's sorrowful, but he's not forgiving. And I think that audio, hearing Mays talk that way, I think it's very biting.
I was so taken by the documentary that I couldn't wait to view it again. And I went back and I viewed it again. And the thing that really stuck to me was it had so many layers. Mm-hmm. And I mentioned in the introduction that this is all about tragedy, but it's also a love story. And can you talk a little bit about the love story? We know the tragedy.
Sure.
But let's talk about the love story.
So I'm going to actually give one more backstory to it.
Go.
For people who can't believe it, Cleveland was actually a thriving city. It was actually a top 3 city in America. Actually, it was Chicago, basically Chicago, New York, and Cleveland for a long time, then San Francisco. But Cleveland was always in the top 3 or 4. So Cleveland was a big city. And at that time, there was a lot of development with people who came from New York and Cleveland. So because of that, you had a lot of wealthy people who lived in Cleveland. One of them was the Daly family. The Daly family owned a lot of oil at that time. And Kathleen Daly, who was later Ray Chapman's wife, Kathy and Katie loved baseball, met Ray Chapman. Ray Chapman, who's the centerfold of the guy who tragically died, he was a superstar. Ray was really well liked. The best player in 1920 for the Indians was Tress Speaker. The most popular player, and by far the player everybody wanted to get autographs for if you were a kid, was Chapman. Chapman was known for singing, dancing. He was known for a lot of joyfulness. So in 1919, after the season ended, the White Sox, to give you a little baseball perspective, the White Sox won, and Chapman was ready to retire because at that time, what was going to happen is he was going to marry. The Dalys were like, hey, Ray, enough of this dangerous game. You need to put your feet up. We're going to give you a cush job. You're going to make so much money, and you're going to become like a president of our oil company. And you're going to marry Katie Daly, and you're going to have a bunch of kids, and you're going to live in Cleveland. So the superstar wedding happens in Cleveland. It was big. In fact, in my research, the wedding between Ray Chapman and Katie Daly was covered in many newspapers from Oklahoma to some papers even in California and Oregon. So this was not just a local Cleveland story. This was a big story at the time that the star player from Cleveland and this oil tycoon daughter were marrying each other. So they were in love. They were just about ready to have a kid when sadly the pitch happened in 1920.
And, you know, again, we talk about the fact that after Ray's death, that Katie really never recovered from that.
No, I mean, you can only imagine what happened. I mean, so for people to give a little backstory, this is 1920. There is no texting. Right. There is no, hey, Katie was watching the game and was wanting to know what happened. Katie was sitting, ready to become a mother, back in Cleveland, where she got a telegram notifying her not only did something happen to Ray, you actually need to come to Manhattan immediately because there's some risk of life here. So Katie reads this letter, goes into a train, does not arrive into New York City until, 7 or 8 in the morning, has no idea that Ray has passed. Mm. And then Tress Speaker sadly had to break the news to her, and more backstory there. Tress was the one who actually told, and Speaker was star player and manager of the team, and best friend, right. And convinced Ray, I think you need to play one more seasons. I think we're going to win the pennant, and we really need you to be part of it. So not only was a guy responsible for his play on the field, he was responsible for the one why he was playing. So it was a very, very sad story in that way. It actually, for a lot of people, not just in Cleveland, the St. Louis Browns, who are now the Baltimore Orioles, to give some history perspective, the St. Louis Browns refused to play until something happened to Mays. So it was a big story, not just obviously in Cleveland and New York, but nationally. And it was heavily scrutinized, as it should. I mean, someone tragically died from a pitch. It's terrible. And what you learn quickly is 1920 did not have proper medicine. Ray Chapman didn't get any ice treatment after he got hit. He was bleeding from the temple. No one treated those injuries until far too late. And so sadly, because of a period of the time, he died. Maybe if things would have been differently in 2022, I definitely think so. But it wasn't. It was 1920.
As I understand, the last words from Chapman was, tell me it's okay.
Yeah. Yeah, he really was in love. They were, I mean, we had historians talk about it. There's research. They were really Mr. and Mrs. Cleveland. I mean, they were that big of a deal in 1919, 1920. Okay. And they were really representing the city because even at that time, stars were stars, celebrities were celebrities. At that time, probably the biggest celebrities in town were Chapman and Daly. They were seen around town. They were riding around, that kind of stuff. So Chapman loved that woman, wanted to make sure he felt protected. And that's what really hits you even today. Ray was a really, really nice guy. Even some of the toughest guys in the game in 20 loved Ray Chapman, loved the way he played. And as you know, we talk about in the film, Mays had a terrible reputation. Mays had a terrible anger problem. in a game it was either 1917 or 18, Mays got heckled by fans. He got so upset he threw a ball into the crowd, almost hitting a little girl. I mean, he had terrible anger issues. Going into the game, he had more hits batsmen than almost double what the Indians had total.
Right.
So, I mean, Mays was a guy who, that was his plate. Now, in fairness, Mays is a competitor. Mays wanted to win. Mays saw that as, hey, this is my plate, and if you're going to, and Chapman did lean over, for more history, that was a bunting game at that time. So people were bunting over the plate and stuff, so he protected it. So all that combined, it was the tragedy at the moment, but in that game, that was kind of baseball. Ty Cobb was not a nice guy. These guys were kind of gruff. As one historian put it to me, Randy Roberts, he goes, these weren't choir boys. I mean, what kind of intrigued you from baseball at that time period was you're going to watch a game, but you're kind of watch people that weren't exactly like your normal mom and pops. These were people that were very tough outlaws, almost. I mean, and so for Chapman, that's kind of the reason why you went. Like, you knew he was going to be pitching right inside the plate, and he didn't. Sadly, Chapman died.
Let's talk about the rivalry. And obviously this event led to this over 100-year rivalry. So let's talk a little bit about that. I know the book certainly makes, explains it out. Why don't you talk a little bit about that?
So again, there's going to be a lot of Yankee fans, and Chris Russo's in the film, Mad Dog. Yeah. He told me, he goes, Billman, no one cares if you're from New York. The Guardians beat the Yankees. And I said, well, you're probably right, Dog. You're probably right. But I go, but from us Clevelanders, it is. And some of the history goes farther than obviously just this game. In the 30s, Joe DiMaggio, Bob Feller were not only competitors, they were great friends. And Bob had a very tumultuous relationship with the New York press and got heckled often. And in fact, there would be all sorts of whistling, and there was a great scene in the 30s where he got heckled so much that when the Yankees came back to Cleveland on Ladies' Day, there's a Ladies' Day on Fridays in Cleveland, the women from the crowd started throwing tomato peels and all sorts of lemon peels and stuff onto the fans. And the manager for the Indians goes, ladies, please, please. I mean, that's the kind of intensity that we had. And for people who don't know, later on in the 40s, from 47 to 54, only two teams from the AL made the World Series, the Yankees or Indians. And usually the other team finished in second. 47, the Yankees won. 48, the Indians won with Feller and Lou Boudreau and that team. And then from 49 to 53 was the Yankee machine with those guys. And then finally in 54, even with the Yankees and Stengel having their best year, the Indians won a historical amount of games. I think it was 110 games that year that they won in 54 to beat the Yankees. So these two teams were always competing in that time period. And then later on into the 70s, this little guy named George Steinbrenner, remember him?
Oh, yeah.
Who grew up as a Clevelander. His whole goal was to own the Indians. He actually would talk about it. He'd be like, oh, I'm going to own the Indians someday. You watch. In 1971, he made a bid with Vernon Stouffer. Yes, that's Stouffer Company that makes microwavable meals. They're based in Cleveland, Ohio. And Vernon Stouffer said no because of a dispute that happened between his son and George, where George, who owned this other team called the Pipers, and long story short, George was denied buying the Indians in 71. In 73, he buys who else but the New York Yankees. And if you talk to the real Clevelanders who are about our age, the biggest thing we always say is, can you imagine if Steinbrenner owned the Indians, the success? Yeah. Because tragically, the Indians went through we call it the dark ages, where for a 30-year stretch, the Indians didn't finish above fourth in the AL East. So it was dark times, and obviously the Yankees went on with Reggie and those guys in 77, 78, 81. They won a lot of championships. So that era alone, and then later in the 90s, we came back with the Indians who really took over the city at that time. And then the Yankees were going through another dynasty. And again, it became one of those 5-year blocks. In 95, the Indians went to the World Series, lost to the Braves. In 96, the Yankees won. And what stopped the Yankees dynasty was another 97 win. So between the period of 95 and 2000, only two teams, again, went to the World Series from the AL. It was either the Yankees or the Indians. And that time, there were very heated rivalry. Tom Verducci, who's now a journalist for SI, still a journalist this day for Fox on the World Series. When I contacted him, He said the deepest rivalry games, Red Sox, Yankees, yes. He goes, I'm telling you, Yankees, Indians was so deep. And he goes, so much in hatred. And because George was from Cleveland and he hated losing to the Indians, he would get very irked when they would lose anytime. So those games had their own thing. And then we had this Bugs incident in 2007, which we talk about in the film, and so on and so forth. So for people who don't know, there is a lot of history between the two teams. What's great from my perspective, being a Guardians fan, we actually do pretty well in big spots. We've won them multiple times to overtake the Yankees, whether it's with Ruth, later with DiMaggio, with Mantle. The Indians have always done pretty well in big spots against the Yankees. So from our perspective, that's how we see it as Clevelanders, as a rivalry. And again, as long as you have a Bay Village, Ohio family owning the Yankees, it's a rivalry, Joe. It doesn't matter. Anybody can say whatever you want, but that is a Lorain, Bay Village, Cleveland, Ohio family, a guy who grew up wanting to own the Indians, and of course they own the Yankees, and of course they won more championships. Right. So of course that would burn a Cleveland fan, just like me.
Yeah. You know, George Steinbrenner made a reference to the Yankees, to that of the Mona Lisa.
Oh, yes.
You want to talk about that?
No, that was a nice little comment. So for those of you who don't know, George was very proud of his Yankees, and there was a very famous radio moment in Cincinnati where people were asking, when are you going to buy the Indians, George? When are you going to buy the Indians? He goes, there's 1,000 in Cleveland Indians. There's only one Mona Lisa. There's only one New York Yankees. And that always rankled us Clevelanders a little bit to this day. But to go deeper into Steinbrenner, Steinbrenner was a passionate Ohioan. His wife was a huge Ohio State person. And in fact, there's a building in Ohio State named the Steinbrenner Center. Mm-hmm. George donated tons of money back to Ohio State. There is a lot. Now, sadly, because of age, people have been passing away. But there's 2 or 3 people I know personally who are huge Guardians fans who also own Yankee season tickets. Why? Because of the Steinbrenners, because of what Steinbrenner meant. So there is a lot of Steinbrenner ties to Cleveland. We had a guy who we interviewed named Harvey Green. Harvey Green's a PR guy for people who watch Seinfeld. They based the character that George played off of his stories because Harvey, his first day at work for the Yankees, got fired. And they go, and he was packing up, and they go, why are you leaving? He goes, George just fired me. He goes, oh, he does that every day. Forget by tomorrow. Just go back in there. So there's a lot of that in there. But for people who have not been to Cleveland or don't know, when you hear George talk, he sounds like a Clevelander. Like he's very on edge. Ohioans we're not shy people. He is certainly not a shy human being. He's very proud. And if you watch his interviews from the 70s, he's always proud to say, I'm from Cleveland, I'm from Cleveland. Mm-hmm. So he wore that C proudly. But yeah, that Mona Lisa line, that's stupid. The Guardians are Mona Lisa too, Joe. I mean, we all know that. And just because you only won 2 championships doesn't mean you're not Mona Lisa.
Right, right. You know, the other thing was, they talked about working for George Steinbrenner.
Yes.
And I know we didn't talk much about why George was unable to buy the Cleveland team, even though he almost had it.
He almost had it. He came very close. In fact, I'll give the guys in the back, there's a clip we're going to play to kind of get into that. But for people who don't know the deeper into this, Steinbrenner's dad was a ship-owning family. And crazy as it sounds, back in the early 20th century, shipbuilding and ship goods were a huge economic, big-time money. And obviously being in Cleveland, if you have ships going in and out, like the Steinbrenner family did, they made a lot of money. So George's dad, who they had a very tumultuous relationship, George's dad thought he goes, look, George, you should just take over my shipping business. He never understood the passion that George had of wanting to be in sports. George was not just in baseball. He was an assistant coach for Purdue. He was an assistant coach for Northwestern football. So the guy always had his hands in sports, and he never quite understood. So the clip we're about ready to play, George was a co-owner of the Cleveland Pipers, which is an ABA team at the time, and they were trying to become pro. And George did something that was not very nice, according to this gentleman, and it was been confirmed, and we'll play the clip now and get into it more.
Early in the summer of '71, it had become apparent that the Indians were going to get sold. The team was dreary, awful, and they were losing money.
They don't need a new ballpark here. But I'll tell you what they do need. They need a sprucing up.
Who should show up and say, I want to buy your team, but George Steinbrenner?
George would pay $8.8 million for the team.
Paper mentioned George Steinbrenner. Have you been seriously talking to him?
We have talked to him over a period of 6 months, something like that, yeah.
It was all agreed upon.
A press conference was called and a deal seemed to be all but done.
There was a whole group of press in the lobby. And finally, Stouffer calls him and he's drunk. He's saying, I'm not doing this deal.
If you were the last person on earth, I would not sell you my Cleveland Indians. And this was because of the check that he stole from his son.
Well, I guess somebody's told the newspaper that a certain person in the city here had offered a ridiculous price for the tribe.
Vernon Stouffer pulled the rug out from under him.
Is any part of the club for sale right now?
At a price of $9 million.
Nick Maletti bought the team in 1972, but the Indian fans' long suffering was far from over.
The Cleveland Indians could win the pennant or could finish last. The beauty of it is, either one of those things can happen.
The ever-competitive Steinbrenner then changed baseball history with his purchase of the Yankees.
The Steinbrenner moment was he grew up wanting to buy this team, and he ended up stealing a check from the Stouffers because the NBA said, hey, if you're going to be an NBA team, where's the money? I mean, you got to have do-re-mi to play in the NBA. So he stole a check, ended up becoming a big controversial. He ended up not getting the Indians. Then later, with Al Rosen was a star player for the Indians. He got him on board. He got a guy on board named Gabe Paul. Paul was actually the GM of the Indians at that time, and he got this influx of, I would say, energy, and he found some investors to believe in George, and then George bought the New York Yankees from CBS television back in 1973. And what's amazing is George, yes, he had collateral from his dad's company. George really wasn't that wealthy. George just did it because he just believed in it and got through the doors. And then the one thing I'll give Steinbrenner credit for, once George owned the Yankees, he put money into his investment. He spent on Catfish Hunter. He spent on Reggie Jackson. He spent to get players in there. He brought a certain respect to them. And honestly, if there's a clip in the film that we play of Nick Maletti, who ended up buying the Indians, Nick was a nice Clevelander, nice gentleman. He was a lousy owner. They were terrible. I mean, there would be days where, like, there's a great story of Hargrove. Mike Hargrove managed the Indians for a long time. He also played the outfield for the Indians. And I go, what's one of your favorite stories from playing a municipal? He goes, Andy, at one time, I was trying to catch a foul ball, and I stepped into a sinkhole and went up to my kneecap. He goes, I was literally stuck. And he goes, anytime I played a municipal, I felt dirty. I just need to take like a shower. So the disparity between the Yankees and Indians in the 70s and the 80s, I can't even tell. Again, Major League's a film. There's a lot of truth to it, Joe. It was bad. There's a lot of bad baseball. You would just go into a game and you could yell, hot dog, and 20 vendors would be ready to give you a hot dog. In this big empty stadium, there'd only be like 7,000 people there. One more about that. So Municipal in the 80s, Paul Hoynes is a longtime beat reporter for Cleveland Plain Dealer. He took his kids to the game, and his mother was watching him, and he goes, my sons were acting like, just not acting correctly. And he goes, I could hear them all the way at the press box. So he leaned over and goes, hey, right there in the middle of a pitch. He goes, you knock it off. I'm going to come down there. So when George bought the team, obviously the Yankees are the Yankees and the Indians are Indians, but the split was ever wider because the Yankees weren't doing very well when he bought them. They took off like a juggernaut. And sadly for us Indians, we dug ourselves deeper into the abyss of losing and just being very lonely as a franchise. It pours salt into the wound, Joe.
Again, getting back to the rivalry, and it's 100 years old now,
Mhm.
and it's still big. The rivalry as far as the feeling of a Cleveland fan versus a Yankee fan. Now, yes, I'm a Yankee fan. I grew up a Yankee fan, and really all I ever knew was the Yankee Red Sox.
Of course, yep.
And to have an opportunity to be invited into this and see really not only how it started, but where it came from and how it continues to last today.
Yeah,
it's
I mean,
amazing to me.
Well, I always say to people, Clevelanders just don't start hating things without a reason behind it. There's a reason why in the late 70s we did I Hate the Yankee Hanky Night. We did it because of the Steinbrenner thing, what happened in the 20s, Feller's just natural hatred of New York. Also, like I said, in the early 20th century, Rockefeller, several others were actually from Cleveland, New York. So if you actually look at it on the grid, Cleveland has boroughs just like New York does. There's Tremont, there's actually a borough called Brooklyn, you have Ohio City, you have all these little pockets. Why? Because Rockefeller and others who said, here's some ideas that we should make Cleveland just as cool as New York. And the biggest difference between the two is, as sadly, New York built a subway system, Cleveland had passed one, and boy, just poor decision making, they decided not to go through with it. And I really believe this day, if Cleveland had a subway system, I think you'd have I know from economic studies, I think it'd be a much different city. That aside, that's what pours into this. Right. There is a lot of those similarities between the two cities. Cleveland also, and that's where you reference Believe Land. So not sure you watch War on the Diamond. You should probably watch that wonderful film Believe Land that some little guy directed. But if you watch Believe Land, Cleveland's heartblood is sports. There's good days. When the Browns win, we're happy. When the Cavs win, we're happy. When they lose, you can ask these ladies in my house. It's very sad. It's very meek. There's not a lot of energy because Cleveland really gloms on to how the sports teams do and how the city feels. And there's a lot of history of reasoning why of economic trouble. So because of that, we see ourselves on these levels now because economically we don't match up in New York whatsoever. They're far different. New York's got far more money and far more success. But where Cleveland tries to compete is on the sports level. So when we play the Yankees, it's not just playing the Yankees, it's playing New York. And there's a natural of that because history tells you, at one time Cleveland and New York were very similar. They're not now. So how we compete is on the sports field.
Right. And I also look at the fact that Cleveland promoted the rivalry. Mm-hmm. I mean, look at the 70s where you saw, Chambliss and a lot of the big players from Cleveland wound up in New York uniforms.
Gabe Paul.
Yeah.
I mean, again, there's a huge, it's not just made up. There's a lot of these things that were, honestly, in recent day, in 2016, the Andrew Miller trade, where Miller came over from the Yankees to the Indians, he was the biggest reason why the Indians had so much success in 16. There's a lot of these memories and a lot of these trades that happened throughout time. The biggest, the other thing too was between these two clubs, like I said, there was like a moment with Feller. Feller always was getting into these nasty little moments with the crowd, and he made a very big point. I'm from Iowa, and I'm carrying my lunch pail, and I don't need my tuxedo to play. And I think if you're still alive, he'd probably still talk that way. He's very, very country. He's country Bob Feller. So because of that, he always made a point of saying, like, I don't like New York. So the fans over time would throw baby dolls and be like, cry, baby, because of all the whining that Feller and other Indians would say about the city. So in 2022, Josh Naylor, the Guardians played the Yankees. Naylor hit a home run in Game 4, and he went around doing rockabye. Now, this has nothing to do with Feller, but what was good from a documentarian to go back to New York for Game 5 and to see Yankee fans holding up baby dolls to make fun of Naylor. It's like, geez, it's 90 years later, and they're still holding up fans. And there's a lot of those type of moments. But again, you should, as my new family, the Red Sox is number one. No one's debating that. What we're saying is there's a lot of ties between us two that you may not know, and it's why Clevelanders, or like Senator Brown, who still this day has never gone to a Indians-Guardians game, as he goes, I never want to give a nickel to the Yankees, so I'll never go to a Yankee baseball game.
You know, we also talked about the fact that Major League Baseball finally made mandatory wearing batting helmets.
Yep.
But it took 50 years.
That's baseball. I mean, baseball really loves and hangs on tradition. And there is a big sexiness, romantic thing about it. That's why I love baseball so much. It's really not a lot has changed. If you look at basketball, you look at football, there's all sorts of rules change. There's a 3-point line in basketball, there's a shot clock, there's so many things that have changed the game. And by the way, it's innovated the game, it's made it very popular. Baseball's always been slow to innovate, always been slow to do things. And actually in that time period, being honest, why did they not change? Because the owners were cheap. The owners didn't want to pay for batting helmets. In 1920, the incident with Chapman and Mays, the balls were dirty. Owners used to get really upset when players would hit home runs and the fans wouldn't give the ball back. They're like, that's our, hey, you didn't pay for that ball. You can put that ball right back in here. We're not here to pay for extra balls. So baseball has always been a slow sport. You and I talked about this to bring to more recent day. I think it's a good thing they're doing these clocks. I think it's a good thing that they're doing the no shifts. But baseball's always been slow. I mean, truthfully, in the last 20 years, the netting along the lines, there's been a lot of injuries with fans before then. It's amazing. You don't even think about it now. But baseball took a long time to get netting up and down the line to help fans be safe when they're watching a baseball game. So baseball's a wonderful game. It's a very traditional game. Baseball usually moves slow. And they move slow with the batting helmets. And to think about that time, especially the way Mays pitched. Mays was a side-arm guy pitching a dirty baseball. And you don't have a helmet? That's crazy. And for them to take that long, but that's baseball. I mean, you'll hear that a lot. Baseball is a game that loves tradition and hangs on to it. Sometimes they hang on to it a little too long.
Mm-hmm. Have we talked enough about Mays? Is there anything that we haven't mentioned that maybe identified who he was?
Well, Mays is a complicated character. And in fairness to Mays, even though he had a reputation of hitting people, he had a reputation of being nasty. In fairness, Mays was a character of his time. He grew up in Missouri, or as you would say, Missouri. And he grew up around people who died around him naturally. So he grew up in a time that was very different, kind of made him tough, kind of made him very, very hard-edged and rigid. So because of that, Mays was a competitor who said, look, that's my plate. You can't get to my plate. And so because of that, he protected it. Also because of his background, he was very tough. That wasn't unusual. That wasn't an unusual thing like we would think of today. Mays was kind of a character of his time. So in fairness to him, there's a lot more Carl Mayses in the 1910s and early 20s than there were after that. Mm-hmm. So he's kind of a character of his time. I will say, though, it's remarkable in these audio tapes that he had that he wasn't saying geez, I am really sorry, I feel terrible. That's not Mays. Mays was like, I feel bad, but that's my plate. It was just as much his fault. And he's very, and I remember when I was listening to it, I was like, geez, where's my I'm sorry? Or, geez, I hope the family's doing okay. That's just not who he is. So tragically, Mays gets characterized for that. The Chapman family was actually very forgiving. And they said he would never, they told, hey, everybody should lay off. Mays is a competitor. Ray knew the dangers of the game. And for them to come to the family gave Mays a lot of, which was really, I think, a great thing. He gave Mays an opportunity to go back into the game. Ironically, Mays later became a scout for the Indians. Right. And it was a long-time scout for, think about that. That's a big thing for something to happen like that. But at the end of the day, Mays is complicated because his numbers would signify he maybe should be in the Hall of Fame. And he's not. And a lot of people believe it's because of what happened to Chapman. And it's a very bitter pill for the Mays family. The Mays family believes Carl should be in there. And there's a lot of arguments that he should. And honestly, the Yankees don't get to where they go in the 20s without Carl Mays. He was their best pitcher up until really 23 or 22.
We had 26 wins that year.
Yeah, he was, a side-arming pitcher. And Mays didn't even just do that. Mays, in that time period, would come in to relieve games. He came into many situations when Huggins was the manager, where pitchers would not want to come in multiple days after starting. Mays pitched whenever he was needed. And so Mays was to be fair, he was a high-end competitor. And again, the Yankees don't win without Carl Mays. And that's why the argument's still brought up today. And then the flip argument too, why isn't Ray Chapman in the Hall of Fame? Right. Chapman also, by Bill James and others, believes he should be in the Hall of Fame with his numbers. So both of them are kind of mired in that. They're probably never, ever going to get in, should they get in. And obviously from Mays' standpoint, Mays had to live with what happened for the rest of his life. He seemed to be very lonely at times, but again, that was kind of,
that's who he was.
That's kind of who he was, so it kind of made sense.
You know, I keep looking at the Raymond Johnson Chapman plaque.
Yeah.
And there's a story, there's a little history behind that. You want to talk about that?
There is. So it's in this beautiful Lakeview Cemetery, which is the cemetery in Cleveland. Not that it's ever something you want to aspire. Oh, look at this cemetery in Cleveland. There's many other wonderful things to do in Cleveland. You just don't go to a cemetery. But in the cemetery is President Garfield. There's a lot of other famous Clevelanders there that are buried, and obviously Ray Chapman's one of them. And for a long time, and still today, Clevelanders who know the story, usually before the first game, but on big days when the Guardians are playing, or then the Indians, they'd put a quarter or they'd put a note on the grave, for good luck. And there's still today, especially in the opening weeks of the season, fans will send in gloves, letters for Ray and leaving them on there. It's a very proud tradition. There's a lot of people, like a film I did, Scott Rabb, longtime writer for Esquire and other magazines, huge Clevelander. In big games, he would always put a quarter on the grave, and he goes, I do it for good luck. Cool. And do it to honor Ray. So Cleveland, even though there's a lot of people come in and out, we really do hold on to history very tightly. And even when it's very tragic, we still honor Ray to this day with quarters or signs or anything to show our love and respect to Ray.
Cool. We are winding down here, but we talked about the productions that you've been involved in. What's next for Andy Billman? What's coming up? What's on the pike?
Well, I'm always working on new projects. There's something I'm working on for ESPN that's coming out that's going to be on the history of Southeastern Conference basketball that I'm producing. And then I'm working on a couple projects that are mob tied, doing something with Henry Hill. For people who watch Goodfellas, you can check that out. I'm co-directing with a woman named Cayman Grant. And I'm also doing some other projects that are in pre-production. One that's on a terrible murder story in Boston. And there's some other projects I'm working on. Another mafia type project, actually. I don't know why, I've drifted into the mob. But that's what's going on with me. And then I'm always watching Cleveland sports. I do a little social account where you can find me after every Browns, Guardians, and Cavaliers game at Official Cleveland Sports. And if you really want a good perspective of how crazy Clevelanders are, sure, you can tune in and watch me go crazy after wins and losses. So that's kind of what's next up. But more importantly, what's next up is being here. I love teaching here. I really enjoy the kids here at the University of New Haven. Being a University of Toledo graduate, I relate. There's a lot of good community. I feel like everybody knows each other. You can go to a lot of great universities, and certainly in Connecticut. But what's great about New Haven is it feels like everybody likes each other and respects each other and comes together as a community. And that's why I went to Toledo. And that's why I love New Haven, University of New Haven so much. It's really a good community of people trying to help out each other and really try to look out for the best, not only for students, but for everybody. And I'm very, very lucky to be here. And I love teaching here. Really do, really enjoy it.
And we're lucky to have you here. I want to take this opportunity to thank our studio audience for being here. I want to thank our audience viewing in, and we look forward to you joining us for our next In Conversation. Thank you.